Can talk to the First Minister of Scotland, because while the conflict in the Middle East is thousands of miles away, as we've been discussing, it has affected every single one of our political parties, not least the SNP, who've been gathering in Aberdeen for their conference in the last few days. The Palestinian ambassador to the UK is due to speak there today. And John Swinney, the First Minister of Scotland, will be in the audience, and he's joining us from Aberdeen this morning. Good to have you with us, Mr. Swinney. You announced a series of measures as a government to put pressure on Israel at the beginning of September, including pausing public funding for defence companies selling arms to Israel. If the ceasefire holds, do your measures hold as well, or will you get rid of them?
We've got to make sure that the progress that's been made on the situation in Gaza is sustained and deliverable, and that involves making sure that all of the commitments that have been made around about the ceasefire, the return of the hostages and the resumption of critical humanitarian aid to safeguard the population of Gaza is now able to flow. And for us, we'll obviously continue to engage constructively and actively in the situation and determine whether or not any of the stances that we've taken need to change in the light of the developing situation. But what we can't escape from the fact is that we consider there's been a genocide committed in Gaza, and that will be uppermost in our thinking as we take our future decisions.
You have taken that position, but if you don't want to deal with arms companies, for example, does that mean then that you did not want the UK government to spend £10 billion with BAE building ships on the Clyde?
Obviously, there's a number of different issues that come together here, Lauren. What I set out to the Scottish Parliament on the 3rd of September was a policy approach that recognised that we live in a much more volatile global situation than at any other moment in my life. So I recognise the importance of us being engaged in supporting defence companies and making sure that our security is guaranteed, that we work to preserve the national security of the United Kingdom, and Scotland being part of the United Kingdom at the present moment as part of the alliances, particularly around NATO, in which we are involved. So that commitment that we've given to work with defence companies is part of recognising that global insecurity that we face. But at the moment where we think there is a genocide being committed in Israel, it makes it impossible for us to be able to support any company that's involved in the arming of the genocide that's going on in Gaza just now. But
First Minister, aren't you then trying to have it both ways? Because you don't want to turn down £10 billion for the UK government to build ships and provide jobs and employment on the Clyde, being built by a defence company, BAE. But then, on the other hand, if you think that a genocide has been committed, which has not been confirmed by the international courts, you say that actually you'd quite like to withhold funding. You're trying to have this both ways, aren't you?
What I'm trying to apply is principle here, and the principle comes from the fact that under the ministerial code, I and my ministers have got to make sure that we're complying with international law. There's now sufficient evidence and information that supported many countries and international courts to indicate that there is the potential of a genocide being committed in Gaza. In those circumstances, I have to be mindful of our legal obligations to make sure that we're not supporting any company that's potentially involved in that, because that could compromise our compatibility of acting within international law. But that's a different issue to making sure the people of this country and the land of our country is safe, which is why we need to work collaboratively to protect the security of the United Kingdom, and my government will take the actions necessary to do so.
Feelings have, of course, been running extremely high on all sides with the terrible events of the last couple of years, but also some of the terrible events that have taken place in this country. You attended a vigil after the attack on the synagogue in Manchester. But at that vigil, First Minister, you were heckled by some of the crowd because you also talked about a Palestinian state. Do you want to apologise to some of the people who were there who were upset by you talking about that when they were trying to think about the memories of those people who lost their lives?
I completely understand the distress that is felt by the Jewish community in Scotland at this moment. There are families who were present at that event who lost loved ones in the heinous attacks by Hamas. And I was there as First Minister to demonstrate solidarity and empathy with the Jewish community and to assure them of their safety. But I think people would accuse me of being a hypocrite if I hadn't set out what is my view about how peace can be achieved in the Middle East. And I think peace can only be achieved in the Middle East if there is a two-state solution involving a sovereign Palestinian state. And I think the steps that have been taken by the overwhelming majority of countries in the world to recognise the Palestinian state, and it'll be my pleasure later today to welcome the Palestinian ambassador to the SNP conference in Aberdeen today, and I look forward to doing that as an indication of the steps we need to take to guarantee peace in the Middle East.
So you don't regret raising that at the vigil. Let's just talk briefly about what's happening at your conference. Yesterday, your activists approved your independence strategy, which is to treat a majority, if you get one, it's the election in May, as a mandate to hold another referendum. Our viewers are a smart bunch. That's going to sound quite familiar to them, because that was exactly the same as the strategy in 2022 and exactly the same as the strategy in 2017. It's not very daring or radical, is it?
Well, what it is a recognition that if we look at precedent on this issue, in 2011 the SNP won a majority in the Scottish Parliament and a referendum was achieved.
But it didn't get you anywhere in 2017 or in 2022. And some of your activists are pretty fed up about that. They think you're making the same promise that you know isn't really going to work because you're not sure you've got the support for it.
Well, see, in 2016 and 2021 in the Scottish Parliament elections, the SNP did not achieve a majority in the Scottish Parliament. There was a pro-independence majority, but what we learned over those two parliamentary terms is the obstructiveness of the UK government about enabling the people of Scotland to decide their own constitutional future. So what I'm relying upon is the precedent of 2011, where the SNP won a majority in the Scottish Parliament elections and a referendum on independence followed. And everyone knows that a referendum is the way in which you've got to settle this issue. That is the way in which people are asked a direct question and the outcome of that referendum is respected by all sides. That was the case in the referendum in 2014. So I'm simply saying to my party, and my party overwhelmingly endorsed my strategy yesterday, is that we've got to win a majority of SNP MSPs in the Scottish Parliament election next May, and that's what I'm working to achieve.
OK, First Minister John Swinney, thank you very much indeed for joining us. That's one of the first times on the programme that we've got stuck into thinking about the elections in May, and they are going to be absolutely massive. So it's good to start talking about the politics there.